Today we're going to focus on actually dealing damage to the enemy that we've made. We already have a system where we have a melee combo attack. If you have missed the previous tutorials, that's not a big deal. If you have a different system, you handle attacking differently, that's entirely okay. This should still work with whatever you've got going on. So this is our player character, and he's got a sword in his hand. If we go into the inspector, we can see we've got our weapon script already on it. We can see right now there isn't really any functionality in here, only a couple of bits of information. We're going to change that. So in the Unity editor itself, we're going to add a couple of things before we get into coding. Number one being we're going to add a component to the sword, and that component is going to be a box collider. You can make this box collider as big or as small as you'd like. I would recommend making it a fair bit bigger than the sword, because otherwise it's very easy to make a player feel like they should have hit something while they didn't. So making a nice big hitbox for this, you want to have the player feel like I should not have hit that, instead of hey, I should have hit that, what's going on with this fucking game. Always err on the side of being kind towards your player in margin of error. So now that we've got this hitbox over here, it's relatively big. We're going to enable is trigger, because we don't want it to actually like stop any collision related stuff. We just want it to trigger when we're swiping an enemy. Then over here in our enemy, we have our enemy AI patrol, but our enemy doesn't have an HP. So let's make a script for that and just call it health. It's good to make this a general script that's not just for the enemy, because in the next part we're going to make HP bars for both our player and the enemy. And if this health script is very general, we can use that for both instead of having to make one specifically for the enemy and one specifically for the player. Anyway, we're going to get rid of the start and update function here because we don't really need those, and we're going to make a public float for health. That's actually called HP to differentiate it between the class name, and let's by default set it to 100. Then in the enemy scripts, this might be a different script depending on how your enemies work. We're going to open that up, and in this entire stack of variables, which is very badly ordered, I will admit that, we're going to add a health script, and we'll call that just health. That's fine. In our void start, we'll give health the value of get components health, not get component in children. It's just the same game object. So this way we'll now have our health for this enemy being calculated by having this script on it. And we're actually going to make that a public one as well, because we'll need to edit it from the sword. So now that we're back in our weapon, because we've made all of the preparations that we need in order to make this work, we're going to write a on trigger enter, and here we need to check whether or not what we're colliding with, or what we're colliding through rather, is actually an enemy, because otherwise nothing should happen. So we'll make a var for enemy, and we'll set it equal to other.gameObject.getComponent, and we'll check if the other game object has a enemy AI patrol component. If it has this component, this variable enemy will be set to that value. If it doesn't have this component, this variable will just be set to a value of null. So then we can check if enemy does not equal null, then we can do something, because then we know for sure that this object actually an enemy. And there we can simply say our enemy dot health dot HP minus equals our damage, and that's pretty much all there is to it. And from here, understand that this is the very basic idea of it. In more complex situations, you might want to make a function within the enemy to handle all of this. But after that, we're going to check if our enemy health HP is less than or equal to 0. We'll say destroy enemy game object. So this way the enemy gets destroyed when it doesn't have any HP left over. And that is basically it. Now, to make this a little bit more sophisticated, we're actually going to make two more public void functions, and that'll be enable trigger box, and you guessed it, we're also going to make one to disable the trigger box. For that, we'll of course need a reference to our box collider, and we'll just call that trigger box or something like that. And we can simply just in the enable say trigger box dot enabled is true, And then we can say in the disable trigger box, we can set it false instead. So now we have an easy way to enable and disable the trigger box so that it's only present while we're swinging the sword. We don't want to be able to damage enemies just walking around and accidentally poking them with our sword. That wouldn't be great. And in order for those functions to work, obviously, we're going to need the start function again, where we set the trigger box equal to get component box collider. So in our player combat script, this might look different from what you have on your own. It doesn't matter. Real quick, this is the attack function. This runs every frame. This bit of code checks if you've pressed a button and then attacks. And this bit of code down here fires when you are not attacking. And since we already have a reference to our weapon here, we can easily say our current weapon dot enable trigger box as the function, because it's a public function. We can call it from another class. And then in the exit portion of this code, we can just put the disable trigger box function in here. This way, we'll only have the trigger box for the sword enabled as long as we're actually attacking. And believe it or not, but this is basically all there is to it. This is the basics of a melee combat system. So now we're in game. I'm going to show you the basic demons inspector here. You can see down here his health is at 100. If we walk towards him and we swipe at him with the sword, nothing quite happens. And that is too bad. Why is that, you might ask? Because he doesn't actually have any collision of his own. He's got the Navmesh agent, but annoyingly, that doesn't actually trigger the events we need. So we'll have to add a box collider or a capsule collider or whatever type of collider you want. You could even go for a mesh collider, honestly. And you can edit that to whatever size you like. And just like with the sword, it's a good idea to have this be slightly bigger. Not too much bigger, because this is actually a collider. So it will block the player from moving through it. Quick little thing is the box collider that we have here. You can actually set it to trigger, and it will still work for the on-trigger event on your weapon. And it will actually be better because it will not interfere with the navigation at all. So make it a trigger box. And now if we play again, we'll be able to see that when we attack the enemy, his HP should start going down. And as you can see, he's got 95 now he's got 90, and now he's got, it's a little difficult to hit him, but you can see we're dealing some damage. Now, of course, ideally, you also want to stop his attacks when you damage him. You might want to be able to like knock him back a little bit. That's all quite beyond this video at the moment. We're going to keep it short. That's the basic idea. Next time we're going to implement HP bars. Check this project out for yourself with the HP bar already programmed into it as well. And all the other scripts that you're seeing here that we didn't talk about today but are from different tutorials. You can download these scripts and the entire project file actually down below in the description through my Patreon, as with all my tutorials, and I'll like to see you all back next time. And thanks to my patrons, you can see them on screen right now, and a special thank you to my Cave Digger tier Patreon, Syntax.